Hello YouTube, hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to take a look at one of these sort of classic seminal works that was published in the mid-30s for fantasy. It's a story that was written by a famous fantasy writer named Clark Ashton Smith, who is a big writer in the pulp era. He's not as well remembered today. I think he was mishandled. I think after he died, I think his stuff was published poorly, and so it's not as well remembered by fans of fantasy. People know who Conan is. They know who H.P. Lovecraft, his Cthulhu mythos is, and Clark Ashton Smith was the third of the big giant writers in that era for Weird Tales and other sort of similar magazines that followed, and he was big. There were those three big ones. They were sort of this triumvirate. And a lot of people don't remember Clark Ashton Smith because he wasn't as popularized via later books that came along, like collections and such. So he unfortunately he's just as good of a writer. In fact, I think he's actually a better writer than the other two are. And where Lovecraft is great at creating these sort of cosmic horror concepts, and where Howard is great at these sort of, sword and sandal characters, barbarians and such, big, huge characters that are larger than life, Clark Ashton Smith is better at sort of writing worlds. So his worlds tend to be really good, very well conceived and concepted and so forth. Clark Ashton Smith was a very interesting person. He was an eidetic sort of memory. Once he came across something, he would typically remember it. So he read, when he was a kid, the dictionary. And so he would use, from cover to cover, and so he would use words from it that I either don't know, or I'd have to look up, or sometimes I'll just skip past. And so I'll regularly come across a word I never knew before when I'm reading a new Smith story, like ignescent or something like that. I got to go look it up. What does ignescent mean? Let's go look it up and see. And you'll see this as in a number of other things too that are out there. And he also has read the encyclopedia from front to back a few times too. So as a result, he will regularly sort of have these these sort of things in there that he just happens to know and remember because he read the dictionary and read the encyclopedias. He'll regularly sort of invest his stories and his worlds with these different words, these different concepts, cultures, and such. And it's really very different from a lot of other people that are out there. And I consider him one of my personal top 10 fantasy writers of all time. He's a great writer. And so we'll take a look at Clark Ashton Smith. What we're going to be looking at today is a short story that was set in the mid-30s, and it is, I consider it to be the best story he ever wrote. Some people might disagree with me, although it's generally really well read even for today, even by people who may not know who he is. The name of the story, and just so you know, the name of the story is going to be The Seven, and then it looks like the word is Geas, G-E-A-S, but it's actually an Irish word. It means the word is guess. Gesh, it should be pronounced G-E-S-H, not G-E-A-S. It's an Irish word. It comes from Irish folklore, where a gesh was placed on somebody who was sort of had a sort of magical compulsion that they had to do something. And so it comes from the Irish folklore. So the name of the story is The Seven Geases, and it's from, again, 34. It's a longer story than a lot of sort of the modern stuff coming around at the time and today. It's about 21 pages. I initially encountered it in my Tales of the Lovecraft Mythos, which was sort of a publication by Del Rey, which put together a lot of the sort of stories that were very influential on creating the Cthulhu mythos, and it was a fantasy sort of story that was in there. I have come across it in later works, like I have it in some of my Clark Ashton Smith sort of compendiums and such. In most of them, it's a little over 20 pages long, and it's a good work. You're just going to absolutely enjoy it. And even if you don't like it, because a lot of other folks don't too, that's fine. It's still a seminal work that's a lot of fun to read. So let's unpack what the story does and what it's trying to do, and then we'll take a look at where its impact is today and why people are still reading it and why it's so influential today. So the first thing, let's take a look at the story itself. The story itself is set in a fantasy world called Hyperborea, where we have this main character who is out there hunting for stuff for these ancient monsters that are going to be underground. He accidentally disturbs a wizard who is doing some magic. The wizard is upset at them. They have some words, and then the wizard says, "You know what? You have really annoyed me," so he puts a gash on the man to go meet this nasty person named Sethagua, who he's got to go talk to. So he goes down underground, finds this character named Sithagua, and then Sithagua says, I don't really need you, so what I'm going to do is give you a gesh to go meet somebody else to see if they need you or are hungry or whatnot. And then the story is basically his own adventure through the underground, through the various geshes, and so forth. He's finding these different people, these different races and such, and then coming back up again. So it's basically a sort of adventure. It's a classic fantasy adventure, kind of a dungeon delve, if you will, only he's not under his own control. He's being compelled to do this by the various geshes that he's receiving until he gets his 7th and final gesh and then comes back up. So there's a lot of fun things happening in the story itself, because of the fact that the story doesn't have this major beginning ending plot structure that a lot of people want from their stories, nor does it have a lot of fighting, which a lot of people want from their fantasy stories. It's not a story that sometimes people will say, oh, it's a great story. I just loved it to death. The ending, which I will not give away in this story because I like to keep my spoiler free, a lot of people think is trite. I think it's, in fact, it's the only ending you could come up with. I can't imagine a different way to end this story. Although if you read the story and are enjoying it up until that point, I certainly would understand that. But this story has this great sort of living place, and the sort of concepts that you would sort of expect from a Lovecraft world and a Clark Ashton Smith world are all here. Their characters are going to have these really fancy names that are really cool. It's going to have this sort of central concept of humans aren't as important as we think we are. There's all this stuff going on, all these demons, all these things are more powerful than we are. And we are definitely not nearly as powerful as we think we are. There is an interesting place in the story where this advanced species of lizardmen, it kind of tells our hero that the gesh that he's under really isn't actually magic, it's just hypnotism, which I think is an interesting thing because Clark Ashton Smith will sort of go against his own story during the story. It's hilarious when it happens. So there's a lot of these fun things that are happening in the story itself. It's a great read. I definitely enjoy it. I've read it multiple times. It's still something great today. It's resonated with me today. I think it's a fun story. Now, its impact today has been huge. For example, it was one of these stories that was heavily influential on early Dungeons & Dragons. For example, some of the early people who were playing in the first few groups with the earliest people, like Gary Gygax and stuff up in Wisconsin, would say that this story was one that they were intentionally emulating, and that all the early Dungeons & Dragons is like this. This story has a lot of stuff that has all these different characters and all this different weight and these different races. Dungeon delving is a big part of it too. And such. So there's all these different things, from these giant webs to these lizard people, and even the term gesh itself is one of the original spells in Dungeons & Dragons, which does exactly like what you would think it does. It does exactly what it does in the story. It's a magical compulsion that forces you to do something that you don't want to do. So it's, again, which is exactly what it would be from Irish folklore. So even the very name of this is a big name spell in Dungeons & Dragons and such. So, but again, without spoiling the ending, that ending is one that inspired Dungeons & Dragons. So go read the story, come back, and take a look at Dungeons & Dragons with these fresh eyes and say, ooh, that's cool. I can now see it now and how it's kind of coming about. If you have read it and you want to talk about the endings more and how that kind of really sort of invested and influenced Dungeons & Dragons, particularly the first and second editions, I'd be happy to talk with you more about that further in the comments below. What did you think about it? Did you like it? If you're somebody who loved it like me, love to talk to you about it. If you're somebody who doesn't like it because you think it's a little trite or it doesn't have like a real plot, that's fine. I'm happy to talk with you about that too. Let's talk about that. If you're somebody who thinks the writing can be a little... It's a Clark Ashton Smith piece at his finest. He's a writer. You might have to read a couple of stories before you get his place that he's coming from. There's just so many words you just didn't know. I get that. It's fine. Happy to talk to you about that in the comments below too. If you've never heard of it before, then this is the Seven Geases. Check it out. It's a great story. It's a pivotal story, both in fantasy history. It was hugely influential in the Cthulhu mythos too. Lots of Cthulhu mythos stuff that came along later on followed in its trope. So it was hugely influential in two separate sort of genres. And then also, it's just a great story on its own. So check it out. You'll read it. If you've heard about it, but you've never gotten a chance to, trust me, you're going to enjoy The Seven Geases by Clark Ashton Smith, and who, again, is just a great writer. I just love this stuff out there. So let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, there's no reason not to hit that subscribe button that's right over there on that side. because then you're going to get a lot more videos like this to follow. Hey, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to watch a video. We all have busy lives and such, so the fact that you invested some time in this video, I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your